start recording. So I mentioned a welcome. Hello and welcome to Voices for Virginia's Children, second Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week, affiliated with the Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia campaign. My name is Lauren Sellings. The mission of Voices is to champion public policies that improve the lives of Virginia's children. In direct response to the impact on children and families of the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and racism as a public health crisis, Virginia's Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week was founded in 2020. The precursor of Racial Truth and Reconciliation Virginia was the Campaign for a Trauma-Informed Virginia. Trauma-informed care and resilience acknowledged the impact of trauma on communities of color. When trauma is experienced collectively by communities, whether geographically, culturally, racially, or ethnically, we identify this as a systematic issue. Therefore, as champions for public policies, Voices recognizes that the systems that perpetuate trauma and the long-term inequities and disparities must be dismantled. Through the Racial Truth and Reconciliation campaign, we accomplished two things. First, we engage communities in championing their own solutions authentically in recognition that truth-telling promotes healing and reconciliation. Secondly, we collaboratively identify solutions to address the root causes of inequities. Ultimately, through the campaign, we champion trauma and equity-informed policies to ensure a healthy and just future for children, youth, and families in Virginia. This week, you will have the opportunity to access and actively participate in a variety of offerings across 4 areas: diversity, equity, and inclusion, community-centered engagement, advocacy and activism, and policy, equity, and data analysis. We hope that you avail yourself of all these opportunities and visit as many workshops as spark your interest. For now, on behalf of Voices, I welcome you to Virginia's second Racial Truth and Reconciliation Week. For the event today is We're Talking Generations, Diversity and Representation in Children's Literature. We have Susan Laparo, who is our Children Youth Service Consultant at the Library of Virginia, and she's going to be serving as our moderator today and discussing experiences of cultural representation in literature from perspectives of cross generations and background. Susan is the Children and Youth Services Consultant, as I mentioned, where she provides comprehensive consulting services, training, and support to Virginia's public libraries in the areas of school readiness and summer and out of school learning for children, youth, and families. Susan has worked in a variety of library current settings, university, elementary school, and public. And before obtaining her current position, she was the manager of youth services for the York County Public Library for 16 years. She earned a master's in library science from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and has a BA in English, and also has her JD from the College of William & Mary. And with that impressive introduction, I will turn it over to Susan.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. I'm so happy to be here and part of this great event and gathering this afternoon with our panelists. We have individuals today that cover several generations of age, so they will share their experiences of cultural representation in children's literature using those perspectives across generations and backgrounds. So I'd like to start by having them introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to the questions, some questions that will start a nice conversation. So panelists, would you please introduce yourselves, and we'll go in alphabetical order by first name. So Bria, you're up first.
Hi everyone, my name is Bria Gilliam. I am an intern at the Library of Virginia right now, and I'm also in grad school for my master's in library science, and I work in a middle school library as a library assistant.
Thank you. James?
Afternoon, everybody. My name is James Braxton, and I'm the author of Soul Strong Heroes of Trauma. I also am a juvenile justice reform advocate with Rise for Youth and a gun violence prevention specialist with Bridging the Gap program from VCU Health.
Thank you, James. And Robin?
Hi, I'm Robin Jones, and I am from Central Virginia and a longtime bureaucrat with the Commonwealth of Virginia in the State Energy Office.
Thank you. And Todd.
Hello, everyone. I'm Todd Elliott. I'm Director of Libraries for the City of Portsmouth and an active member of the Virginia Library Association.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start just with some background, and anytime you hear a question and maybe want to circle back to something, feel free. If this is more of a conversation than a question answer period, so just relax and go back to your youth for a moment. So when you were young, were there books available in your house, and were you read to? So we'll start easy. And why don't we'll go backwards. We'll start with Todd.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, and it's good to go backwards with me because I'm probably the oldest member of this panel. And so looking back in the 60s in my own home, yes, we did have books in the home because my mom was a big reader. We didn't get our first TV until I was 5 years old. So what else was I going to do but entertain myself with books? So that was an important part of our households, having those books.
Excellent. And were you read to as a child?
I was. Probably the first book that I can recall was Dorothy Briggs's Noah's Ark from the 1940s. I think it was published in 1946, something like that. But yes, I was read to, and my mom was heavy into poetry, so she actually read a lot of poetry to me and my brother.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Robin, can you share your experiences with that?
Thank you, Susan. Since I made you ask this question to us all,
Yes.
I want to say that I did come from a family of readers, and so there were books around, and I don't remember being read to per se, but I have many memories of my mother at the end of a long day hunkering down with her murder mysteries. She had piles and piles of library books that she borrowed and just went through them. So I had some pretty good examples of the benefits of reading and escape through reading. My father was a big current events guy, so he subscribed to numerous magazines, and that was what he did at the end of his day. So
That sounds so interesting. How about James?
So for me, I have an interesting relationship with books. When I was a kid, I was more so adventurous and trying to be into everything and do everything. And so trying to get me to read was more so used as punishment to get me to sit still and get that information. But I remember having books in my room. I enjoyed books that were adventurous, like the Boxcar Children and Hardy Boys, things like that. But I don't really recall being read to that much. So, yep.
Yeah, I'm sad it was a punishment for you, but sounds like you survived it.
Yeah, I
a
got through.
good punishment.
And Bria?
Yeah, with my memory of the books, they're definitely around. I think every once in a while, my mom would sit down and read books with me, but mostly, no, I wasn't read books too much, but they were always there though. Was always books in the house, always.
And it looks like our youngest panelist has joined us. So we have Henry and his mother, Joy. If you'd like to just,
Hello.
hi, thank you. You're sideways.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
And Dad just rushed in from work. I'll let him say hi. He literally just rushed in.
Hi.
All right, but here we go.
So if you just want to introduce yourself, and then our first question was just about what we talked, just if books were available in the house and if you were read to. So that's for Henry.
Okay. Hello,
Hi, Henry.
my name is Henry and I am 10 years old.
Thank you.
And I'm the co-author of My Dad Has a Food Truck.
That is so cool. So,
Wow.
Henry, are there other books in your house besides your very own one that you wrote?
Yes.
And do your mom and dad read to you?
Yes. Used to.
Used to, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you do now?
I play video games a lot and call with my friends
And read your Pokemon stuff?
and get Pokemon cards and play with them a little bit.
That's a nice variety. Thank you. So building on that a little bit, and a couple of you mentioned some books from your childhood, but if you could think back to what your favorite book was as a child, and it can be at any age, and then maybe if you had a different favorite book as a teenager.
What was your favorite book?
You're muted.
Oopsie.
My
Okay.
used to favorite book was Cat in the Hat, and now my favorite book is Dog Man.
Oh, excellent choices. Very nice. How about you, Bria?
Yes, I know we talked about it before. My favorite book as a kid was A Bad Case of Stripes by David Shannon.
Mhm.
But as I got older, as a teen, well, as a teenager, it was Hunger Games. So that was like high school age. And middle school, it was the Ugly series by Scott Westerfield. So those are the books I was kind of into.
Have you continued reading sort of in the fantasy or adventure genre?
No, not as much. Well, and which brings us kind of with this topic, as I got older, I wanted to see myself more in these adventures and science fiction books. So I didn't really read fantasy or science fiction for a while until Children of Blood and Bone came out.
Mhm.
Because it's written by an African American, and I can really see myself in that book. And then another fantasy series called The Bells by Donna Hill Clayton. So that really got me excited and wanted to read more about those books again. But it took a while for those books to come out.
Yeah. James, how about your favorite book? You mentioned the Boxcar Children and the Hardy Boys, but were there any others that you remember?
I would say when it was not involving punishment, I got turned on to comic books. And so Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, I just saw so much color, so much adventure. And that's what I gravitated towards until I got a little bit older. And then it became, I started getting into deeper kinds of trouble. And so my mom recognized that I needed books that would motivate and inspire me. And so as I was on punishment, she put the Ben Carson autobiography on my lap and made me read that, as well as the Buffalo Soldiers. And I could not get off punishment until I read those books. So I don't remember much about them, but I remember the Buffalo Soldiers did kind of grab my attention. So
I think those are solid choices she made for you. How about you, Todd? Do you have a favorite?
Well,
I know you started with Noah's Ark, but did you progress from there?
I did progress from there, and a lot like James, I did gravitate to comic books at a pretty early age. So many comic books there, and a lot of these comics in the early 70s featured Black characters. Luke Cage, Power Man, Hero for Hire, as he was called back then. That was I think 72, 73. So I'm about 10 years old. So that was kind of a cool thing to be able to see as a kid. But like James also, my mom made me read good books too. So African American biography, for example, I remember reading about folks like Mary McLeod Bethune, and she had me read Sounder. And you know, it's funny because I didn't gravitate to books like that right offhand. My mom had to kind of push me there. Like Bria, I had to, you know, I preferred fantasy and escape type books, and there wasn't a lot of diversity in that. But so favorite books of mine, say around, you know, late elementary, early middle school, or the Narnia series, and you know, A Wrinkle in Time. I read and reread. I don't know how many times back then. But as I became a teenager, I started gravitating toward books with these, you know, odd duck, you know, lone wolf type people. So I started reading on my own, you know, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, Les Miserables, which is still one of my favorite novels of all time, Victor Hugo, and 1984, those sorts of things. But I would say out of oh, and I discovered Richard Wright, and that was a great thing for me, you know, Native Son, and Black Boy especially. That's something, you know, that's a title that I pick up and you know, reread every so many years. So that made a big impression on me.
It's interesting how you went toward the classics as you got older.
I was a weird kid. You know, I grew up, a good chunk of my childhood was spent in Portsmouth's largest housing project. But my mom had some college, and she just, she had big plans for both of her sons. So.
Well, she did well, and you did well too.
Thank you.
Robin, what were your favorite books as a child and as a teenager?
Well, I remember my favorite as a young person, well, maybe a baby person, was a series of cloth books that I don't remember the stories, but I remember loving them because they were literally made out of fabric, and they were, I guess that's a thing still. I don't know. I haven't been shopping for babies lately. But I also had a special little bookcase that was my own, and it was filled up over time with, I think it's called the Golden Book series. So these were books for youngsters, and lots of pictures and beautiful gold printed spines. And so I think really I love the books more than the reading. I mean, I was just attracted to having my collection. And I grew up in a big rambling house. I'm the youngest of 4 girls. And so there were bookcases. My mother had bookcases tucked in and built in strategic places around the house, not for any other reason except, you know, the books pile up and they got to go somewhere. So, you know, another bookcase outside my bedroom was filled up with textbooks and bodice rippers, perhaps, and I don't know what all, but I remember kind of skulking around in my mother's, at my mother's bedside table and reading things like Rebecca or A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I was just a kid. I didn't have any idea what this was about, but I was looking for mischief to get into, you know, looking for maybe some illicit sex scenes or that kind of thing, you know, just as a kid thinking I was really doing something. I'm not able to say I found anything, but as a legitimate favorite, I loved Charlotte's Web. And then there was this strange series called Journey to the Mushroom Planet.
Oh, I remember
one of my sisters turned me on to, and they were so odd. I mean, we're talking about the mid 50s. And so, you know, we didn't have like spaceships and stuff then. These were things that were just in the mind of this writer, but they were wonderful mind expansion things. So those are the things that I remember.
You are all making me remember some of my childhood favorites, and I really now want to go back and reread them. So
Yeah.
thank you. But I did read those mushroom, that
Oh, you
mushroom
did?
series.
Do you know who
I
wrote them?
I don't, but I can visualize what the covers look like.
Yeah. And I always, or later, thought they were by Ray Bradbury, which kind of would
Right.
be vibe, but I've never been able to find them again or pin that down. So that's your assignment, Susan. If you would,
I'm writing it down right
find out
now.
who the writer was. But another example, let me just say, of my attraction to books, more so than the love of reading, was about being a girl child. When you're a girl child, often your parents are very protective. You don't just kind of go wandering off from home. But my mother taught me at a young age, pretty young age, and I'm thinking maybe 11 or something, how to walk to the public library in my city. And she was very strict about what route I could take and how long it would take to get there, to be there, and to return. And this was my experimentation with independence. And so I would often have business at the library just so I could kind of go, you know, and be there and wander around those stacks and the smell of old paper. And, you know, I just love libraries from that time.
Well, that really just leads right to our next question. Thank you, Robin. So as a child and teenager, you know, you can use whatever age you'd like. Where did you get your books besides your home? If you know, what was your source of reading material? And Robin just gave us the library as an example, but does anyone, Todd, do you have a source of your reading?
Yeah, as a kid, back then, I don't know if they still have that now, but we had RIF, Reading is Fundamental, and they would come in and provide free books to kids on a regular basis. Book fairs, you know, at school were a great source. In the library, my mother took my brother and I to get our cards when I was about 7 years old. And you know, the great thing about my neighborhood was that it was less than half a mile from the main library where I work today.
Very impressive.
So needless to say, the library made a big impression upon me. But also, my mother, for a time, worked at a kiosk that actually, she worked for Barnes and Noble before they were bricks and mortar. And they were like a little subsection in Rice's Nachman's down in downtown Norfolk. And so she got a lot of books to us that way. So I was reading Twain and Owen Wister's The Virginian. That's, you know, again, escapism stuff. Robert Louis Stevenson read so much of that. So yeah, I had really good sources for my books.
I was gonna say, you had a nice pipeline there for some books. Excellent.
I really did.
Bria, how about you?
Yeah, I was gonna say I mainly got my books from the school library or the public library because when I was younger, you know, we didn't have internet access, so we would go to the library daily after school. And as my mom was internet surfing or whatever, I would be browsing through books and get DVDs. And that's mainly where I got my books from. And the librarians, they were really helpful with suggestions. That's how I would find what I want.
James, did you have a library experience or a different experience?
Sure thing. So I'm originally from Hampton, and I remember my mom and my dad taking us to the Hampton City Library, and I just would look forward to that because it was so big, so many books, so many things to do. they got divorced when I was about 9. And it's funny you mentioned, Susan, York County, because my mom, my sister, and I moved to York County, and I went to Tab Elementary School, and I looked forward to the book fairs. But you know, during that time, my dad was struggling to find work. My mom was taking on the load. And so as much as I would look forward to the book fairs and I would love to go and see all the books, we couldn't afford for me to really get any, you know, so there were times where I would get 1 or 2, but man, I would just look at all the kids grabbing books and I'm like, man, I wish I could just grab them. And I think that's the fact that I couldn't is when I really lost my taste for reading, because I just didn't have access. So.
That's sad. Yeah, I think that happens. Henry, do you, are you a library user? Henry? And Mom? Well, it looks like they're having a different.
Having a discussion, yeah.
And Robin, you already talked about the library. Did you have any other sources of?
Again, my mother was a murder mystery person. I didn't really get that, but I was a kid, so you know, and even into teenage, I don't remember having much time during high school for reading. My mother believed in keeping you busy, like with candy striping and Girl Scouts and all kinds of stuff to keep you out of trouble. But I remember we're talking about how rich our home lives were with books and readers and parents. But I remember as a young kid, when I occasionally visited other people's homes, I was always struck by places that didn't have books. I just, I mean, you know, it was like normal for those people, but it was odd. I always felt that was odd. And even if you think about it today, when you visit somebody's home and you don't see books, it kind of, it's kind of odd feeling. You wonder, well, what do they do? I mean, we do have computers and internet and games and stuff these days, but I guess I'm just struck by the fact that everybody wasn't taught this as a kid. Everybody didn't have it. Like James is saying, you know, he was frustrated as a kid because he could see that there were resources out there, but he just couldn't avail themselves. And I think there's still today a lot of young people who don't own books. I just think it's so important. But that's an observation I've made. But libraries, definitely libraries for me.
Right. There's something so special about owning a book. You know, as much as libraries do, and I'm an advocate for them, of course. You sort of touched on it too, Robin. It's almost the physicality of it that it's such a special thing, which is why I still read in paper rather than on a device. So
yeah.
So a few of you touched on this. Was there some particular person that that helped you find books that were of interest to you? And Henry, is Henry available to share?
He just went into the bathroom, but I can try to help.
We can wait for him.
Okay.
We'll wait for him to come back.
Okay.
So James, do you want to address that at all? If you had a special person or anyone that helped you?
Yeah, so again, my experience with books was a little special because I was also labeled as non-conforming. And I just was always in trouble, always getting suspended from school, you know, fighting, things like that. So people would bring books to me as my mom, because again, now she's a single mom and I didn't really have a tight relationship with my dad. So she was trying to find ways to get to me. And she would have mentors and just different people that would try to hand me books to read and thinking that that would fix me. But it wasn't, I don't think it was time, and I don't think it was the right delivery, because it was presented in a way, here, you read this book and you'll act better, as opposed to you should read it to enjoy it. So I was handed books to fix me.
That's interesting that they were sort of a medicine or a antidote for you rather than for pleasure. Yeah, very different. Todd, do you have a special person or people besides your Mom?
Well, my grandmother was an avid reader too, but thinking outside of my family unit, the people at the library would make recommendations, and those recommendations really stuck with me. One fellow in particular turned me on to Lord of the Rings, for example,
Oh, nice.
and it was like, wow. But I was thinking about, how I engaged in the classics, and it reminded me how I had eighth grade teacher when we lived in Syracuse, New York, that had the class. He would assign different different characters for different members of the class to read, and so we read Steinbeck that way, and Arthur Miller and all that. So I'm thinking that that's kind of how I ended up going. That English teacher kind of pointed me in the direction of enjoying the classics.
Yes.
So he brought it to, he made it come alive. So that was good for us.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Major classical and intellectual reading going on this panel. I haven't even read many of those things you've talked about, Todd. So I got my work cut out for me. But
take your time. It's just, like I said, if it's something that catches your interest, jump on it. But at the same time, if you enjoy a good comic book, see, when I was reading comic books, they were what, 20 cents? It's a lot different world now, so, but yeah, if you enjoy it, my oldest son likes to read urban fiction, but if he enjoys it, it's got to read, and it's like, go for it.
I thought I saw a bit of an eye roll there, Todd.
I saw it too.
Henry, I see you're back. I wanted to ask you if there's, besides your parents, if there's a special person that helps you find books for you to read, like a librarian or a teacher.
Fourth grade teacher.
Okay.
Tell her about her.
Can you tell us about that?
She wrote this book called it was like a shadow cat.
Oh,
It was very big, and he had like an owner. And then she read this book that was about this big gorilla, and that's it.
and it connected with you?
You must have enjoyed those to remember them so nicely.
Yes.
Did she read it like as part of at the end of the day, or as part like after recess or after lunch?
After lunch and at the end of the day.
That's nice. That's a nice way to structure the day. That just made me remember my fifth grade teacher read us Island of the Blue Dolphins, and I just grew to love that book just by her reading it to us. So thank you for reminding me of that, Henry. Bria, did you
say
have
that when I was a teenager and going to the public library, I was not able to establish a relationship with the librarian or the workers. And these were times when Black people might not have been welcomed into the public library. Obviously, we helped pay for it and support it, but I think it was seen as though we were not supposed to be there, not welcome, not wanted. And so I remember kind of going in and just enjoying being there because, like I said, the quiet and the smells and all of that, but just really feeling unwelcome. And so I'm so glad that there are people like Todd and Susan, you all today, who really care about your constituents and are welcoming to them.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, things have changed for the better, I believe, for the most part. Bria, did you have a librarian or you mentioned earlier that they did help you, but do you have any particular other people?
No, not particularly other people. It's really just my middle school librarian. She helped me a lot and still works at the school today, so I still know her.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and she's really sweet. So she really helped get me into different genres and like expand my knowledge. And that was when I really started like liking reading, was definitely middle school.
Oh, that's pretty inspiring. Yeah. And Bria, while we have you, because you said you did, this was, we're going to talk a little bit about representation in children's books and young adult books. And you said about the books in high school that you first saw yourself in. Did you want to expand about that and sort of how it made you feel?
Yeah, definitely. So the books that were really coming out when I was in, or popular books that are coming out when I was in high school, they, they really weren't diverse, but they did touch on different topics like, like revolution or rebellion, like with Hunger Games. And I would kind of have to put myself in a book in a different way. I couldn't put myself, I wasn't able to find there weren't really that many books I was reading that had a Black person in it or a Black girl, but they would have someone like fighting for a cause or just going on an adventure or fantasy. So you really wouldn't, they didn't have a color necessarily, but they didn't represent me. And so I think when I was a little past high school, a book that really resonated with me was The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. So books like, I started reading more books like that I could really see myself in, that were definitely, I could see myself in the character more. And now I feel diversity in books is really going in the right direction. And there's more books out there for young kids and older kids and adults. And that I'm hoping, that publishing, they're definitely working harder to get more diversity in books. It can always be better, but I think we're like definitely finally in the right direction. And I'm hoping that kids in middle school and high school won't have to read just any book. They can, it's important to read all types of books, but definitely books you see yourself in.
Definitely. Thank you. Todd, how about you? You're muted.
Thank you. Yes, well, it was a different time. And just real quick, because what Robin said, I just want to touch on that before I go forward when she talked about not feeling welcomed in her library. I was fortunate in the fact that our library integrated in 1963, and I was born in 63, so I don't remember a segregated library. So that was probably beneficial long haul, but Portsmouth did have a colored library, and which, I got to know the librarian because she did end up working at the main library downtown. So Bertha Edwards, she's deceased now, but long a Portsmouth treasure. But as to who I first remember seeing, and many of you may be familiar with the story, was A Snowy Day, which came out in the 60s. So that was the first time that I can remember. Ezra Jack Keats, his books, he provided fair representations, Black characters, usually, little Black boys. And it was just nice to see a boy doing something that looked like me, that was just interacting with his neighborhood and all that, the way he did. And so that was cool. And I would have to say that to some, maybe a lesser degree, was Corduroy by Freeman, because there's a character's named Lisa, I think,
Mhm.
who was, brown skin. Her features, I think, were probably more Caucasian, but she been colored in. So yeah, but our kids, they're now 36 and 30. Fared better when they were small. So because I asked my 30-year-old the other day about this and what books resonated with him and where he saw himself. And interestingly enough, it was some of those books that dealt with African themes, like a story,
Mhm.
the story about Anansi. And so that resonated with him. So it's good that kids have so much more to depend on. But again, mom and dad, my wife was an English adjunct over at Tidewater Community College. So there was no way they were getting out of getting good books presented to them, right away.
Excellent. Henry, do you remember seeing yourself in books? Someone that looked like you?
Okay. There we go. He said, what was the question again?
If he remembers seeing people that look like him in books that he reads.
Oh, remember the book you told me about?
It was this person that Martin Luther King Jr.
Mhm.
That's the first book.
That's the first book that I saw.
Person of color.
Person of color.
And how did that make you feel?
Good.
Good.
That is a good, honest answer. Thank you. James, do you remember a book that you saw yourself in and how it made you feel?
I think the first one was actually Ben Carson autobiography.
Mhm.
For me, I think it made me want to become a doctor because that's the premise for his story in that book. But I remember back then when I was a kid, I wasn't looking for myself in books because that wasn't really the topic. And I think the landscape of advocacy at that time is different than what it is now. So you have so many organizations and so many folks fighting for Black folks and minority folks to be represented in books. And I don't remember there being an intentional push for that back when I was a kid. So, yep.
Okay. And Robin, do you remember?
I think I don't think they'd invented people of color in books when I was coming along. But interestingly, this was apparently a really important thing. I mean, to my parents and to my community, because there would be a thing where you'd be washing the dishes after dinner or whatever, and there would come on the television a Black person doing something, performing or speaking or whatever. And then the telephone tree would start, and people literally would call each other and say, Black on TV. That was like the code. And literally, we were being guided by our community, our friends, our neighbors to say, we're not on television, you'll never see us on there, but here's Nat King Cole, or some person of celebrity, or just a person, a Black person on television. And so looking back on that now, it's kind of very sad that there was so much of an appetite for that in people that they literally, I mean, it was literally a phone call, Black on TV, and then they might say a channel and then hang up, and that was all that was needed. But in terms of children's books, I remember there were books about Indians or Asian children or whatever, just kind of peripherally. But I think the another expression of that appetite to see yourself was in the the periodical literature that my parents would subscribe to, there was Jet Magazine and Ebony Magazine, and then Black Enterprise. And I think that Essence Magazine, that was there, the beginnings of those things. And, you know, so there really, really wasn't a hunger for that. And so I think that mostly about the idea of having literature of my own with myself in it kind of went over my head. I'm kind of a slow learner, I guess. But when those magazines would arrive in the mail, you know, you were on them. You wanted to see them. What's going on in Ebony Magazine, which might be, if you think about Life Magazine, but this was for a different community with, you know, beautiful photography, beautiful fashions, people of, you know, substance, writers and actors and statesmen and scientists. You know, that is where we would see that, but there definitely was an appetite. And so nowadays, as Bria said, you know, there are more and more. I don't think it's for any great reason, except there is a demand for it. There's a market for it. Publishers are trying to make money. And so as long as we continue to support this, then we'll see more. We'll see more writers, Black writers. I mean, all of that, you know, diverse writers. You know, you'll read more about what's going on in Bombay or, you know, other communities around the world, because not only are we looking at diversity in terms of Blacks and whites, but now we need to know what's going on in Argentina and you know, Thailand, for instance. You know, we're a world community now, and so this diversity is really critical for all of us. I think for children as well as the rest of us, I think.
Definitely. And I like what you said about the TV and the magazines. And I think that illustrates that both the media and periodicals can react a little bit faster than the publishing industry, that they were better able to see the demand, or at least a partial demand, and react to that. So that's a really insightful point you made. So I don't know if any of you have heard this, or read of Ravine Sims Bishop's analogy. She said that books need to be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors for young people. And in saying that, she said children need to see themselves reflected in books like a mirror. And they also need to have books act as windows into the world around them to see experiences different than their own. And then the sliding glass doors allow them to temporarily enter a new world. So I wondered what your reaction was to her description, if you think that's accurate. We'll start with James.
Yeah, it's my first time hearing that quote, and I thought it was perfect. And honestly, you know, I think it's a template or a guideline for what needs to come out of the books we produce for kids these days. You know, if it's not doing those things, it's just so powerful. You know what I mean? And I think that if it was presented to me in a different way, in a different light, it probably could have been even more impactful for me at that time as a kid.
Nice. Todd?
Yeah, that's definitely true. And as important as it is for it to reflect like a mirror, it is a good window out so that kids get to understand how other children are living, and you know, in what ways that they might be the same as well as different. When our kids were young, we introduced them to different, you know, to a diverse collection, not just, you know, a lot of good Black writers, but and it helped too that my wife had a book group that she hung out with that included writers such as Joyce Hanson and Diane Johnson Feelings. So, you know, Tom Feelings, in fact. was one of my patrons at the library I worked at in Columbia, South Carolina.
Mm.
So we were pretty fortunate to get that kind of good exposure. But like I said, just as important as it was for them to see other Black children interacting, we wanted them to be familiar with stories from different countries and all. So and there's some great authors out there. There were some great illustrators for them. You know, my oldest was a reluctant reader for a long time, so it was a little bit of a challenge. But again, if he had a chance to see something that reminded him of himself, and it didn't have to be necessarily a Black child, you know, but just someone who felt the same way that he did, that was an important thing. So yeah, absolutely, great quote.
Good. And Briette, Todd just sort of touched on what you said about just the characteristics sometimes are seeing yourself. But what do you think about that quote?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that quote before, and it's definitely good to see yourself in literature. You know, seeing when you're reading a book, seeing a character who's maybe dealing with similar things that you are or have similar situations, it's always good. And it's definitely, if you're reading, you know, other books or other genres that don't necessarily look like you, it definitely gives you like a window into other areas. So I definitely like reading books about like different cultures, like Hispanic cultures or African cultures, and that I have never been to or experienced. And so reading those in books, you definitely learn a lot and see a little glimpse of other people's worlds.
Definitely, yes, I agree. Robin, have you heard that quote before? Or if not,
I have not, but it's a brilliant, I think it's a beautiful quote. I wanted to tell the story that last evening I had dinner with a friend that I haven't seen since before COVID. And she's one of these powerhouse women who read like 7 books a week. She has a demanding job. She's a wife and mother, but she is a serious reader. And so I always like to ask her, well, what are you reading? And so she said, well, you know, I read biographies. I love biographies because that teaches you not only about the subject of the biography, but it teaches you about the writer. And it teaches like a reflection of you. It teaches you about yourself. Like, this is what that writer thought or did. And then it causes you pause, because then it makes you sit back and think, well, that was dumb. I wouldn't have done it that way. Or, you know, that, or how did he know? Or wasn't she brave? Or that kind of thing. And so this friend went on to say that right now she was reading a book called The Watchman. I think that's what it's called. Mm-hmm. And she was going on and on about how wonderful it was. It's about a Native American, I think a Sioux community somewhere in the West. And she said that it was while it is a fiction, it is teaching her about life in this Sioux community. And I was struck by that, because this is a friend who's traveled and been all over the place. But here she was, you know, here in late 2021, learning about a neighbor culture and being moved by it. And so that gets back to my idea about how important it is, and if you think about diversity, to expose ourselves to writers from, like Bria said, other countries, other cultures. But also, I love those books where the protagonist is a girl or a woman, and she's kicking butt and, you know, making it happen. And I think that's just important for any reader to see that. So thank you. I always have to give you a long-winded answer just because I can, but thank you.
No, it's very good descriptions, and they're very meaningful. Henry, have you ever thought of a book being a mirror or a window?
Oh, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Right. Have you ever thought of a book being a mirror so that you see yourself in it, or a window where you can see somebody else's life through it?
like the Martin Luther King thing. It feels like a reflection to me.
Okay, definitely.
Because he used to be a boy.
Because he used to be like a boy that did right stuff,
Like really good things.
Mhm.
and like really good things.
Definitely. So I think Robin touched on this and Bria maybe a little bit too. Thinking of, are there any other groups that you think need better representation in children's literature? Some strides have definitely been made in a lot of areas, but as you think about it, or even adult literature, we can broaden it a bit. Do you think there's something missing still?
I don't mind jumping in on this.
Sure.
So I'll use an example. Like when I go to Barnes and Nobles to look for books for my kids, I have two kids, 15-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. And when I go, I typically have to go way to the back, and against the wall, there's maybe a section of maybe 8 to 12 books. And that's just me seeing reflection of myself and my kids. But then when I think about, Native Americans, when I think about other minorities, Spanish, Asian, it's even less. And so it would be nice to see just a diversity section alone in Barnes and Noble or bookstore or whatever, just so kids with that are diverse can have somewhere to go. And it's not just 5 to 10 books, it's a whole section. You know what I mean? So, and it shows the importance, how we feel about them and how important they are. And that usually is how they register, how they feel about themselves. So we just got to do better with that as a whole.
You're right. Bria, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with James. I can definitely attest to that I feel that, in publishing and literature, definitely BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, that it's really low. And like he said, even lower for the Indian and Asian community and Hispanic community, is even like the Spanish speaking section at libraries tends to be very limited. So I always feel like that is definitely an area that can be improved on. I mean, all the areas really, but those ones specifically.
Todd, do you have any ideas or any observations?
Absolutely, because I'm a librarian, right?
Of course.
But in preparation for this dialogue, I went over to the Cooperative Children's Book Center, which is from the University of Wisconsin, and I recommend it if you want to learn more about diversity in children's literature. But I went there to get the hard facts on books about, as Bree mentioned, Black, Indigenous, people of color titles, and discovered that in 2020, the center had received 5 titles about Pacific Islanders, 27. I just pulled it up on on my screen, but 27 books that are Arab, Middle Eastern, Latinx has actually dropped a little bit. Now, we know from the census that the Latinx community has actually grown, and yet there's been a slight decrease in the number of books received in 2020. So there's definitely room for improvement, so that diversity gets everybody together. Like I said, I am always concerned about African American representation, but I am also concerned about other children and other groups being able to see themselves as well. It's equally important for them and for their parents to be able to make those connections. So we have to do better. I read an article not long ago, and L&O from I forget the name of the organization, but stated that a lot of times publishers don't think that there's a that you can make money with by selling books about people of color, but that's clearly not the case, because books are selling. If last year is any indication, people were getting books, anti-racist books and things like that, going to the list to diversify their collections more. So there's definitely a market out there.
I'm so glad you mentioned that Cooperative Children's Book Center, because that's a wonderful resource. They produce amazing book lists, and they are very, they have a searchable database that you can, put in any terms, but a certain population or certain group that you're interested in, you can get results. So thank you for doing that research. Robin, do you have any thoughts about this?
First of all, I want to recognize Todd's book tie. Very, very beautiful book tie. That must be his librarian tie. But I also wanted to acknowledge a couple of things that he alluded to. And I often think about, golly, I wish I was like 50 years younger. I would do this and I would do that, and wouldn't it be great? And so I was thinking about, maybe Bria also mentioned it, that we have these burgeoning communities of like Spanish speaking people. And so they're the new Black people kind of a thing, where they're being made to feel like they don't belong here in large part. And many perhaps are not great English readers, perhaps. And so I love the idea that there are books written in other languages. I always kind of, it causes me a little pause when I run into them on the shelves, like, wow, well, this is in Spanish, I can't read that. But in fact, there are people who can read it, and they need to feel invited in, and they need to know that the resources are there, and we all need to invest in those resources, just as an example. But then there are local writers, new writers. I think we need to support them. And, I belong to a book group that only puts forward writers from Richmond, for instance, that kind of a thing. And so what that does is it makes me go out to a small bookstore and buy a book, as opposed to going online and, calling up our big friend, who I mean. And so there's all kind of there are all kinds of ways to think about diversity. And I'm challenging us and myself. Let me say, I'm challenging myself to be more open and to realize that there's like a whole world out there. Like another example is this whole graphic novel thing. I'm thinking, God, who wants to read graphic novels and comic books? But alas, we've had at least 2 people on the panel who say they love that stuff. So anyway, my point is that I have a lot of growing to do, and maybe, as Todd said he read Crime and Punishment or whatever crazy thing he read when he was a teenager. Anyway, my point is that this participation in this panel has made me realize that yes, we all need to avail ourselves of these resources if they're out there, and then we need to make sure that the people out there know that they're there and are supported. Like if you have reading a book to kids kind of a thing, what would keep you from reading it in Spanish to them, even if they don't speak? You know what I'm saying? Just kind of opening people's minds to the fact that there are other things except ourselves.
That's a really good point. And just to give a plug for a recent project the Library of Virginia is undertaken, we just started a Dial a Story program that you can users can dial into a toll-free number, and we do have it in the story, same story in both English and Spanish. And it's a dream of mine to be able to expand it to other languages. But right now we have at least 2. So thank you, Robin, for bringing that up, that is important. And it's a constant struggle. I know in libraries, it becomes almost a budgetary decision too. Like, how do you split your money even more among more specific parts of the collection? But all good things to think about. So we're going to move to publishing a little bit, and because James has published a book, and I'm just interested in his experience in getting it published, if there were, and sort of how that went in the publishing world, and so any insights you have from that experience.
For sure, and my answer actually ties into the last question as well, so I'm answering both, if that's okay.
Please.
Yep. So I just published my children's book back in December, So Strong, Heroes of Trauma, but it was not my first book that I published. I published my first book, I want to say back in 2017, 18, and I never released it. And I never released it because of, I didn't believe in my relationship with the publisher. And I'll tell you, so I wanted to go the self-publishing route. I wanted to have full ownership. I wanted to have full control and wanted to be independent. And so upon doing my research, I found, different publishers online who offered different self-publishing packages. And this in particular publisher I found, they were very professional. They were very polite, but there was a significant difference in our culture. And I don't know what country they were from. And I have no issues with anybody from any other countries. As a matter of fact, I got more of an issue with American culture than anything. But ultimately, there was a significant language barrier, and we didn't understand each other. And more so, I didn't want to create a product about money. I wanted to create a product about impact. And the publisher I chose, I needed them to understand the impact I had to make with the project. And there was a disconnect there. And so for me, if the publisher doesn't understand what I'm trying to do for my community and for young people, then to me, it just can't happen. And so years later, I sat and I'll show you. So this is actually an enlarged version of the book cover, So Strong, The Beaten Path. It's hard to see because of the reflection.
I can see it though, it's good.
But the children's book, if you can see, it's a similar cover. So the young man in this book will grow into the older gentleman and go from there. So for this, I was like, okay, I need to do my research and find Black publishers. And so I did my research and I found University of Moguls, who is a Black-owned publishing company out of Detroit. And what I really enjoyed about that experience, it was completely different. And it was a Black gentleman by the name of Sean Blanchard that runs it. And it was exactly what I was looking for, because when I spoke to him, he fully understood what I was trying to do with this project. He fully understood why it was important. And I got that investment back from him that I needed. And so, and the other thing that was different was, with the first publisher, it was just about business. Like when we talked, which was rare, hey, this is what we got, this is what you do, and then that was the end of it. With University of Moguls, he created an entire program, an online programming that taught me and taught other authors the entire process of how to publish your book by yourself, how to go get your own ISBN, how to market your book, how to set up your business, how to do everything. And it was just much more impactful. And so I look forward to more Black-owned self-publishing companies doing the same. And I think if we do, we will begin to control the narrative the way that we need to about our own stories. And even with, my children's book, it's about what's happening at this time. You know what I mean? So when kids see a reflection of themselves, they're going to see masks. They're going to see a single parent family home, which a lot of kids live in. And, it's going to spark conversations that need to happen inside the home about that. So for a publisher to understand that, that's extremely important, especially if you want to make impact.
I can see you have a passion right there. You just lit up with excitement when you were talking about that. So I'm glad you found the right match, because that's so much of the process. Has anyone else interacted with publishers either from a library or purchasing part or as an author?
I can say this about purchasing. There are products out there that can help librarians to make their collections more diverse. So Portsmouth just purchased a product which is going to go through our collection and let us make sure that we're able to make meaningful purchases, you know, because our collections budgets are finite, you know, no matter how large you are, you've got to work with what you've got. So we want to make sure that our collection is reflecting the community that we serve. So there are things out there. Publishers and book vendors are becoming more cognizant of this. So they're making sure that the metadata, that information that identifies the book, you know, is able to make it easier for our library customers to find what they're looking for in regards to diversity. So it's been a process, but it's definitely moving in the right direction.
And I think what Robin said earlier too about sort of supporting some of the smaller publishers, and she was talking about supporting the smaller bookstores, that is all in a good effort to propel those businesses forward and get them, you know, get them more in the forefront.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. I don't have much experience with publishing or dealing with publishers, but I do support local bookstores. Most of the time when I get my books, like 7 out of 10, I'll go to a local bookstore.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a step in the right direction. Does anyone have any closing thoughts from this discussion? It's been a really wonderful conversation, and it's really made me think. It made me remember some old favorite books, and it's made me think about some things I could do better. But does anyone have anything they want to sort of close with? Robin, I'm sure you have some thoughts. Or maybe she's not there.
I'm here. I'm just trying to, I'm trying not to talk too much. You know, I have an opinion, but I just want to thank you and the Voices for Virginia Kids for giving me this opportunity to meet the panelists and to share some ideas and some stories from my life. Even though I came kicking and screaming, like, I don't have anything to say. You don't want me on this panel, but thank you for the work that you, Susan, and Todd and Bria and James do. I haven't really got much of a handle on Henry yet, but I think he's on his way. So on his way. But anyway, thank you for this, and please keep doing this work. I think it's really, really important.
Well, you were an excellent participant, and you shared very meaningful and interesting things, so I appreciate that. Bria, do you have any last thoughts or comments you don't want to miss sharing?
No, I definitely appreciate this conversation, which I think is always a great start for, you know, things changing and getting better. And I'm just happy to see more diversity and inclusion in books and publishing. It's definitely like gone a long way, and I really hope that children start to see themselves and their friends in different books, and, you know, as things evolve and change, that so do the books.
Definitely. James, do you have any closing insights?
I just wanted to thank you all for inviting me to share, and it was good to meet all the panelists, and I hope to connect with you guys soon.
Definitely. And Todd, I know you have some wonderful closing thoughts.
Maybe. No, but really, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. So I did enjoy it and getting to know the panel. I will say in closing that as important as it is to get books in for our children, diverse books in, we also want folks who are involved in the process to be diverse as well. Diverse folks in publishing, as James mentioned. We want diversity in libraries. There's, for example, there's only about 500 or so African American men in the nation that have a library science degree, and yes, I'm one of them. But that's, you know, that's a low number. So we really want to expand diversity in those areas that will connect our young people and their families with books.
Excellent points. Well, again, I thank you all, and it's been such a meaningful afternoon, and I appreciate your participation so greatly.
And I also wanted to say thank you from Voices for Virginia Children. Thank you to James and Henry, Joy, Bree and Robin, and Todd for sharing your truths, and for Susan for moderating today. There's still many events happening throughout the week, so please check them out on social media and our website to learn more. I was just talking to staff, although we weren't able to do comments today to share links, we will make sure to send an email out to everyone who registered, including the links to the books that you could purchase today from James and Henry as well. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful evening, and hope to see you at other events this week.
Thank you.